Attention, please. Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authorities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And thank you and welcome to those watching online. We have a number of participants who will be joining us online to make their contributions as well. That's officers, not decision makers, who all have to be in here with us. So can I start please with apologies for absence and ask the Scrutiny Officer to tell us about those, please.
We have received apologies from Councillor Goltack and apologies from Councillor Dew.
Thank you very much indeed. And we are quorate with 12 members out of the 14. The next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are members happy to agree those, please? Thank you very much indeed. And then any declarations of interest in any items on the agenda? I can't see any, so thank you very much indeed. Public questions is number 4.
No public questions received.
None received, thank you. Item 5 is the Overview and Scrutiny Committee Annual Report and Centre for Governance and Scrutiny Review feedback. So we have the draft report here from me with a we have a report here from me with a
recording in progress
of the report from myself and Councillor Sharp as Vice Chair, and then we also have an update on the review of what happened following the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny recommendations. So does anybody have any issues, comments on those, or are you content to agree those two reports? Everybody happy? Good. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. So we're invited to comment, which there have been no comments. To approve the reports, we're happy to do that. To comment on the Overview and Scrutiny Review, happy to do that. And approve that document as well. Yeah? Good. Thank you very much indeed. Item 6 then is the Combined Authorities Climate Change Plans. So we have with us at Item 6 a report from Councillor Michael Atkins, who is our lead member on this Committee for Climate Change and Environment. We also should have with us, I think, Adrian Cannard online, and we have with us Councillor Bridget Smith in person, who is a member of the Combined Authority Board, leader of South Cambridgeshire, of course, and the lead member on the board for climate change matters. So between the three of them, we should have plenty of information and advice at our disposal. So I'm going to ask Councillor Atkins, please, to introduce his report.
Thank you, Chair. I won't spend too long introducing the report. I hope it's relatively self-explanatory. The reason we're considering it today is that the Combined Authority Board on Wednesday will consider the proposed Climate Change Action Plan, detailing a range of proposed expenditures and activities for the next few years. And this represents a major new piece of work for the Combined Authority. It's not been a significant focus of its activities up till now, but it will be from this point on. And so it seemed an appropriate moment for Overview and Scrutiny to consider this matter and to provide our input and what assistance we can in this work. So in terms of how we got to where we are now, the Independent Commission on Climate, which some of you may be aware of, was set up a number of years ago. They spent 2021 issuing several reports, and following on from those reports, the Combined Authority has drawn up this action plan, which is going to the board on Wednesday. I reviewed a draft copy of this a few weeks ago. I don't believe there have been any significant changes between then and now, but I apologise if I lead you astray in in any regard. You'll be aware, I think, from your own work that trying to get the timings right in terms of our scrutiny of what goes to the board is difficult. So you'll appreciate that this report was composed at some speed. So if there are any mistakes, those are entirely mine. I'm very grateful to the officers for their input, which was sought, and took several recommendations to correct factual issues. So I'm very grateful to that. I'm hoping we can have a reasonably wide-ranging and broad discussion on this subject. I think that this is definitely a moment where we can influence what the Combined Authority does and what its priorities are, and how it seeks to go about them over the next couple of years. I draw your attention, I think, particularly to those areas where there's significant funding being proposed. So I detailed in the report a number of projects, sort of essentially kind of pilot projects in a number of different areas, which I think the Combined Authority is hoping will sort of crowd in investment from other public and from private sources into tackling some of these big issues. I think I might leave it there at this moment. I might ask perhaps if Councillor Smith or if Adrian Cannard wants to come in and talk more broadly about what the Combined Authority's plans are and why they've chosen these particular projects and these particular strategies to pursue, and then perhaps we can open it up to the floor for a general discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Atkins. I think I'm going to ask Adrian Cannard, who's online, to come in first and then turn to Councillor Smith. Adrian, is there anything you would want to add by way of introduction to this item?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. Just to highlight one aspect which is also at the board on Wednesday is the new Sustainable Growth Ambition Statement, which very clearly identifies climate as one of the 6 areas for particular attention as part of our strategy work going forward. And so that links in with the consideration at the same time of this climate action plan. And in the report to board, we highlight how the climate working group has focused in on collaborative actions, as the Councillor mentioned, in terms of stimulating wider activity. We recognise we are part of the picture, we are not the whole picture on this.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. Councillor Smith, thank you very much indeed for coming in person to join us. Is there anything that you'd like to tell us about the climate work of the Combined Authority and the proposals that you'll be debating at board on Wednesday?
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. So, you'll be aware that climate and environment have been sadly lacking over the last few years from the work of the Combined Authority, in much the same way they were lacking from the early work of the Oxford-Cambridge ARC. And so I'm really pleased that we've got to this stage we're at now, where we actually have an action plan. I think there's a lot that we should be worried about. I think the £700 million per annum that's been identified, which is what's needed for us to achieve the government's targets. I think there's a lot more work to be done on that, on where that money's come from. And though the Combined Authority has funded some pilot projects with very £10 million is not a small amount, but it's a small amount in terms of the total amount that's actually needed. So I think there's now a wakening up of the Combined Authority and of the board that actually climate change is the biggest threat to all of us. We've had a pandemic, hopefully we're going to survive that. We currently have a war, hopefully we'll survive, well, most people will survive that hopefully, but actually climate change is the one thing that we might not survive. And therefore it's got to be the overarching priority. And in the same way at South Cambridgeshire District Council, it's our overarching priority in everything we do. I think there's still more work to be done with the Combined Authority in really embedding it in everything. And I think there are some questions to be asked about whether the Combined Authority should be funding roads, whether it should be funding car parks and things like that, because actually its priority has to be in driving modal shift and getting people out of their cars and either into electric vehicles or onto bikes or high quality public transport or onto their feet as well. So I think there's still some way to go. I think the work of the Commission was outstanding. It was very, very ambitious. I think it would be very easy to argue that it was undeliverably ambitious, but if we don't have ambition, we're not going to be able to achieve the government's targets, never mind the targets that the world needs as a whole. So I think it's a starting point. It's really not going to be easy. In relation to the pilots that have been funded, I think, as has been highlighted in your report, it was probably sensible to call them pilots. I think a lot of thought needs to go into where you go from these pilots. I've over 14 years as a counsellor, I've seen lots and lots of lovely pilots doing terrific things, and then when they get to the end of the pilot, that's the end of it. So I think there has to be a plan for how the learning and the good practice in those pilots actually develops into something that's longer term and more sustainable and really starts delivering. So I really welcome this coming to you. What I would hope is that Scrutiny and Overview would start to take a long-term view to monitoring the effect of the effectiveness of the combined authority and its partners on delivering on government's targets, particularly in relation to modal shift and into carbon reduction as well. Particularly in terms of retrofitting homes. This references a sum of money for retrofitting under the government's warmer homes. I think it's only going to affect about 100 homes. It falls way wider the mark of actually delivering both the reduction in carbon emissions but also the improvements of quality of life and affordability. So I think we've got to start, when we're talking about climate change, we have to accept that that's inextricably linked both with quality of life, with health and well-being, and with it has a huge role in the cost of living crisis as well, in driving people's cost of living down at a time when it's never been under more stress. So your involvement is welcome in whatever way you see fit. But if your role can be to hold our feet to the fire, to encourage us to do more. The paper shows that this has been very under-resourced with officers. We're very lucky to have Adrian and Paul Rains, and I think some of Steve Cox as well. And I think we're employing another person who's going to be dedicated to this work. But actually, it needs to be more. If we're talking about £700 million spend, that takes a lot of people, either within the organisation or within our partner organisations, to actually deliver a programme to really realise the outcomes that we want. I think I'll stop for now and try and answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, questions and comments, please, on this. Please indicate. Councillor Rippeth.
Good morning. So it's not too broad, and so there's a real focus to get everything going and started. My suggestion would be possibly on retrofit and also transport. Obviously public transport, having been non-existent in a number of places for many years, would be a good place to start. Railway stations, integrated bus network, and then retrofitting homes. I think those should be the two things which you ask the government for more money, but also show how it's going to be delivered. And one thing that I think works quite well at the moment is Solar Cambridgeshire, where you can auction, you put your bids in to bring the price down, as a way of also kind of making people aware that it actually exists, that the schemes exist, and the more people who bid, obviously the lower the price. That would make it a little bit more accessible, say, to insulate your home than it currently is. And of course that also buys into the whole problem at the moment of exorbitant energy price rises. But yeah, they're my comments really.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We've got a lamentable lack of public transport. We're lucky that, at least in the Greater Cambridge area, we have GCP, but obviously that's not touching East Cambridgeshire, Fenland, Peterborough and so on. I think there's an argument for much, much stronger working between GCP and the combined authority, and I'm hoping that comes forward, and perhaps roll some of those benefits out on a wider geography, because it's the problem is, we are a big area. We're not big enough to solve some of the problems. That's that was I don't know whether the Oxford Cambridge Arc still exists. That was an opportunity to deal with some issues on a much larger geography, such as the shortage of water and also rail. So we're a bit hamstrung by our geography, but we're also challenged by it. And I think there's some work to be done to identify what each of the authorities are doing, and we're all doing stuff to tackle the climate change and enhance our environment. I think there's a piece of work to be done to really collate that, then look at ways in which it can be sort of agglomerated so that the benefits are rolled out between districts. We're not all constrained by our boundaries. And then I think that will help us identify what additional monies and powers we need to be going to government for that will allow us to start making a bigger difference on that wider geography.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Adrian Cannard online. Adrian, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that. I don't think I'm going to come to you automatically to comment or answer everything, but if you have got the sort of online hand that you can raise to indicate you've got something to say, if you can use that, then I'll try to make sure that I come to you for that. Is there anything you wanted to add on that in particular?
Thank you, Chair. I will wave at you should I need to come in with a factual response. In terms of the public transport, just to say, obviously we have the bus service improvement plan bid in with government, waiting to hear on that, and we will be coming out to consult on a new local transport and connectivity plan in the summer.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. Councillor Davies next on my list to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Lorna. I'm not sure who this is for, this question, but and at the risk of appearing contrary, bearing in mind representing Cambridge City, my question is going to be about how we're working with farmers. The county is predominantly rural. The challenges that farmers have to meet are significant, and yet they're going to play a vital role in what happens to the future of this county in terms of how we achieve the goals that are set out. And so it's more a question about how has the initial engagement been with the NFU and other farmers' representative bodies, and what our plans are for the future, really, and how has that engagement gone, and is that a role for the business board or the mayor or who? So it's really just a sort of general question about how we're going to do that, Bridget, really.
Thank you very much, and I might need to bring in Adrian. So I certainly know in my role leading on the Oxford Cambridge Arc, the NFU have been heavily involved. I think they're on the working group as well, aren't they, Adrian? On our climate and environment working group.
Yes, so we have had a lot of engagement with the farming community on our work, so both feeding into the initial independent commission's work. We had John Shropshire representing the farming interests directly as a commissioner, the current climate working group as the NFU. We also have a farmer who is leading the way in trialling some alternative farming techniques to feed in opportunities. So they are very closely involved, and as the combined authority, we have funded some work to a group called Fenland Soil, which is looking at emissions and opportunities to do with the fens, particularly the peat issue.
Thank you. Councillor Miscandlin was next.
Thank you very much. Your pilot schemes, you've got a list here of pilot schemes. Do you intend to expand that? And what do you do when it's finished? Will you add more pilot schemes, or will you concentrate on what you consider to be the most beneficial of those pilot schemes that you originally ran?
Thank you. So, building on what I said in my introduction, we need a plan. We need to make sure we have a plan to build on those pilots, because it's very frustrating when pilots just happen in isolation. I'm assuming there will be more money, and again, I might need to defer to Adrian here. So, I think it's a starting point. This is slightly new territory for the combined authority, so I think it's a good starting point. But I think we need to make sure that we have a proper strategy moving forward, which encompasses all the things that are in the action plan. It's imperative that we bring in other partners in order to help resource, but also to help fund as well. So I think my answer really at the moment is I don't know. The pilots that we've had, I think looking forward and the conversations that the board have had recently, it's really important that we're funding stuff which has maximum impact geographically. So the only one I can really sort of talk in detail about is the Waterbeach solar farm, which I think is going to be charging bin vehicles from East Cambs, South Cambs and county as well. So it's not just one locality benefiting from that. So I think that's the ongoing piece of work to make, and again that'd be something that I'm sure you can help us with in how you think we can capitalise on the pilots that we've got now, because it was important that we showed evidence of progress, really, rather than just keep the money in the bank while we kept on deliberating on things. But your help would be appreciated in how we take things forward, and also what a more structured strategy should be moving forward. Adrian might like to come in and add to that.
Would Adrian like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so a couple of points. So one of the benefits of running the pilot work is to help build local capacity for identifying projects and bringing forward and sharing that best practice to stimulate other areas. That gets us in a good position for future funding opportunities, not just from the Combined Authority's own budget, but from government schemes, which there's been quite a significant level of resources coming, and we've heard about the Sustainable Warmth Programme for retrofit already. The other aspect I'd highlight is that one of the recommendations that we're taking forward is to look at financing green or green finance. So it's about how we can be in a position to help the private sector invest in climate and green activities in our area. So that will open up new avenues of funding, we hope, as we go forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Miscandlin wanted to come back on that.
What are you doing to consult with town and parish councils? I know you're consulting with the district, because I'm the chairman of the district council at Fenton, but are you consulting with town and parish councils?
So that will cascade through the different districts. Certainly, the towns that are getting funding for their regeneration projects. Obviously, we've been working very, very closely with them. But I think for the combined authority to be communicating, well, I've got 106 parish councils, so it would take up all their time. But I think that cascades down through the membership. Adrian, is there obviously everything's up to date on a website, and I certainly write a monthly report for my own parishes where I report on the work of the combined authority, and but I'm not sure whether the combined authority wants a direct link at parish level or whether it's actually feasible to do it. I'd be delighted if they did, but Adrian, please.
Adrian.
I think a particular aspect, we've got one of our budget lines is to run a net zero programme with local communities, and so we are just shaping that business plan now, and obviously we're looking at how we engage with parish councils and town councils as part of that process. So we've obviously got an opportunity coming up where we're very directly going to be engaging and looking for projects to come from the parish level as we go forward.
Thank you. Yes, my eye was particularly struck by that line in the budget, and I know that there are a number of parishes, including more than one in my own patch, who are already getting themselves together and organised and have websites and all sorts of things about reaching net zero in their own communities. And I think we needn't necessarily assume that everything we do in this area is us telling parish councils what to do. I think very often they can tell us what to do, and I think that upward communication is welcome too, very much. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I'm being very realistic about what's achievable. I know from my own experience, solar panels cost £6,000 to install, air-to-air heating was £8,000. If I wanted the property, and it's an old property, as 60% of the properties are within Peterborough, if I wanted a retrofit of insulation, which should have been done first because it's most effective, that's going to be between £8,000 and £12,000 to do properly. We're talking about such huge sums, and we're going to be dealing with a lot of properties where the owners probably don't have the wherewithal to be able to provide it themselves. We've got to be terribly realistic about what's achievable. And I'm wondering whether the investment should be more in terms of the money that we do have, and whether that can be put into skills for green jobs, for example, to make sure that we can really get good bang for our buck by having something that's scalable. And of course the various funds that are available from central government are very welcome, but they're woefully inadequate for the task at hand. I just wondered about whether we've got the right strategy here.
So the business board, I know, are very involved in developing the skills agenda, and particularly in green skills. The work I was doing on the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, it had a focus on that, but also on creating a green economy where we actually manufacture this stuff locally as well. So, why are we shipping photovoltaics in from China and so on? Why, if we want them on every roof in Britain, surely we have to be manufacturing them ourselves, and the same with air source heat. So yes, the cost is absolutely prohibitive, and the current situation we're in just makes it even more prohibitive. So obviously, you're quite right. Government could give us a shed load of money, but if we don't have the people and the skills to actually install this kit in people's houses, it's all going nowhere. So I know the business board is heavily involved in this. Certainly, the Oxford-Cambridge Arc still is, if it still exists, and I think as partner members of the combined authority, I think we're certainly doing work on this at South Cambridgeshire, and I'm sure you are in Peterborough as well. I mean, with your new university, should be an absolute breeding ground for the skills that we need, and I think that's the advantage of that. We've just got to make sure that the benefit goes out through the whole combined authority. But you're quite right. There's no point in us getting the money before we've got the people who can actually deliver it.
Just come back, it's also the actual technology that's available as well, and I know we have these difficult questions about whether nuclear and local nuclear is an option with all of the risks that comes, but we have somehow, Cambridge is renowned for its ability to innovate, whether that's that the new technologies or repurposing old technologies for local power and energy provision is probably something we should be investing in too.
Yes, you're getting above my pay grade here, I'm afraid. But yes, no, I quite agree. I mean, one of my big gripes is that we have so many conservation areas. I think conservation areas and listed buildings. I live in one. I actually could afford to put PVs on my house, but I'm not allowed to. So we need some direction from government there, as well as from our own authorities, that actually allows us to retrofit all of the housing stock equally, because actually some of our older houses are the leakiest, and it just means that people like me freeze basically because I can't afford to heat the house.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sharp was next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask I suppose, what we're here to challenge, I suppose, about I've been looking at the report that's going to the board on Wednesday, and we're looking at setting up a Cambridgeshire and Peterborough decarbonation fund by June 23, and touching on that, by March 24 deliver local area energy plans for Cambridge and Peterborough. I'm just wondering why, it may be a valid reason, but I'm just challenging why such a long lead time. And then the third, if I do them all in one go, then come back. The third one, we've touched on electric buses and public transport. And I know when we had the budget before us a couple of months ago, we were, I think most of us, hopefully I don't speak out of turn for anybody, but we were a bit surprised by the sparsity of what was in the capital projects going forward. And looking at the paper again that's going to the board on Wednesday on the financial side there, and I know we've got the local transport and connectivity plan going to be consulted on, but there doesn't seem to be any provision in there for the capital purchase of buses. So that would be my three initial challenges, and there may be some very valid answers to that, but just looking at the paper, that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to defer to Adrian for the first one about the lead in time. On the buses, obviously the money for the 30-odd buses came from a government grant. I actually pushed for us to bid for 150, and I was told that there's a kind of sweet spot you hit when you're applying for these government grants, and if you're too ambitious, you won't get anything, and actually it's better to be more modest in order to, guarantee getting some money. So that was the judgment that was made. It's not enough electric buses. I believe there are supply issues as well. We're trying to convert our refuse lorries to electric in South Cambridgeshire, and the price is hideous for a start, over 400,000 per vehicle, but actually the supply is very, very slow. So there are logistical problems there. What I hope is that we can demonstrate that our 30 electric buses are heavily used, hugely successful, and then like a pilot, it then gives us strong argument to then put in a bid for 150 and start to really make a difference. Chair, if I may defer to Adrian on the first question.
Yes, indeed, and I'll apologise to Adrian. I didn't see your hand in time for the previous question, so if there's something you wanted to say in response to that discussion, then please do that as well as addressing Councillor Sharp's first question.
Okay, so just on that previous debate, one of the actions is to bring forward a local area energy plan for Cambridgeshire. There is already one in production for Peterborough, working with the Energy Catapult. So looking at those broader scale issues around energy. In terms of the timings of the two projects mentioned, the Decarbonation Fund, obviously we're looking at a project to attract significant additional funding into the area, and that is going to be heavily reliant on working with not just government but also the private sector, and we need to do some market testing and look at the different financial options. We know there's a growing interest in green finance and investors looking to deploy some very large sums into green investment. It's about how do we make appropriate packages that will deliver both their needs and locally. So we've allowed ourselves time to do that, work with the market. And similarly on the second project, which is the sorry, can you remind me what the second?
So the local area energy plans.
Yes. So
March 24. Yeah.
So again, on those, there is already a significant amount of work done by UK Power Networks as the energy distributor in terms of their modelling of what happens. We want to take that further, but we want to build in some of the learning from the Peterborough work that's underway, and allow sufficient time to build that strategy. So hopefully we will deliver before that deadline, but we wanted to be realistic in terms of engagement and the processes we need to go through in terms of developing it.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. And I'd also like to say that at the County Council we have also received reports from the students on the CUSPI programme on both the decarbonisation fund and on local area energy planning. So we've had those discussions at the County Council, including some sample case studies for local area energy planning for 3 of the market towns in Cambridgeshire. So there's work going on there as well, and it's about joining up all of that and all those discussions that we're having in all those places. Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Yep, we're still good morning, aren't we? Just a bit more intrigued about the retrofit scheme. So in your opening statement, you said about you have enough funds for probably 100 homes. I guess it'd be nice to know one, have they been chosen yet, and is there any case studies on those? So we can learn from that. But I guess to drill down a little bit deeper on that, it'd be interesting to know if what you're hanging everything on, whether it's is literally just going to be air source insulation and solar. And the only reason I ask, that in an ideal world, we know insulation's a massive thing, but we've had quite a discussion earlier on about how expensive that is and how hard it is to do in our pre-meet. But the reason behind all this is something as simple as changing radiators in a home to more like a modern version. They don't hold as much water, so therefore your boiler is not working as hard to heat. They convect better, and that's probably £600-700 investment per home. Whilst yes, the insulation is very important, but do we look at that to sort of say, well, actually, that's going to make a massive impact because we're not going to use as much energy to heat the homes to the same degree that we are at the moment. Yes, if we can do some insulation as well, obviously that's even better. But I'm just interested to know how, whether we're hanging a coat on everything on one thing, or whether we're sort of drilling down a bit deeper.
Thank you. I'm not sure, I'm going to have to ask Adrian, that we've got all the details of this new scheme. So you'll be aware that these warmer home schemes, they've been through, I think we're on the 3rd iteration, and the last one wasn't very successful, and all the money didn't get spent, is my understanding, and I think that was because there weren't the people. I think the company running it, something went wrong. Adrian will know the details of what went wrong. So I'm not sure we've got all the details yet on the latest scheme. But Chair, if I may ask Adrian, he's been more up to date than I am.
Indeed. Adrian, are you able to comment further?
Yes. Again, I'm not leading on the details, so I won't try and answer all the details about it, but basically it's the next iteration of the government grant funding. Local authorities have successfully bid to draw down that money. They're in the process of establishing the scheme in terms of the parameters. It is this iteration of the grant is focused on low-income homes and raising them to a certain standard of energy performance. I don't know what measures are in and outside of scope, but insulation will definitely be part of that, because as I think was mentioned, effectively if you are bringing in different heating measures, then insulation is vital as a key first component of that. So it's been led by a partnership with the local authorities in the area, and they're in the process of procuring the relevant arrangements to deliver that. So we can certainly circulate some information on the scheme post this meeting.
So if I may suggest, Chair, I think that's a really good thing for you to be looking at, and looking at the effectiveness of it. What the criteria is for low, what they mean by low-income homes, whether that includes homes of multiple occupancy, which are often, really very, very, very poorly insulated and with huge carbon emissions, and often people on the lowest income. So, it might be something some way down the line that you want to do a piece of work on.
Yes, there are indeed a number of us who are concerned at the proposal going to the board on Wednesday that we will have to hand back £22 million in unspent money on the Green Homes grant. And although there are further tranches, I think, in the reports on Wednesday to be spent in future years, nonetheless that 22 million, drop in the ocean though it is in terms of the money that we actually need overall, is money that, you know, it would have been good to have seen spent here. We have famously now on every front page of every newspaper the cost of living crisis and the cost of living, particularly when it comes to energy bills, and we will need, as I understand it, to insulate nationally something like 1 million homes a year in order to reach net zero 2050. Cambridgeshire County Council's target for the County of Cambridgeshire is 2045 net zero. Huntingdonshire, bless it, has a net zero target of 2040, so good luck with that. But it is an issue where we're also aware that everybody seems to have a finger in the pie, and yet it doesn't seem to be terribly high profile anywhere, and certainly not at the level of public and accountable discussion of the whole insulation programme. There is cooperation, collaboration between different tiers of government, but not anywhere where we can have that public conversation, or where we do have that serious public conversation about the importance of insulation and how we are going to reach those very, very ambitious targets there. So yes, I think it is something we do very much need to come back to, and I very much hope that we don't have another meeting of the committee in this form in the current municipal year, but our next meeting, or the next meeting of this committee, I'm not making any suppositions about who's on it, including me, the next meeting will be in June, and I very much hope that we will have something on the agenda soon. And we were discussing even having a meeting with the Energy Hub in June to kickstart that discussion. Councillor Rippeth.
Thank you for letting me come back again. I just really want to support what Councillor Corney's just said, because I think we might be sort of missing a trick in a way, because we're talking about all these different options, and actually should the target be getting people's homes to be running off electric radiators? I know at the moment the cost of electricity is high, but surely that also links with, I hope, government ambitions to transfer away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. So is that, maybe that's what we should be looking at? I think that was what you were kind of also saying. I hope I'm not paraphrasing it too badly, but is that something to sort of go down and also to attract money? I think we had to be quite kind of focused on what we're actually going to do, as opposed to another pilot, another kind of discussion, another plan. Something needs to be kind of visibly happening.
So I think the cost of living crisis is going to be a real driver here. So, you know, our focus has to be people using less energy to heat their homes, because energy, whether it's electric or fossil fuel, whatever, costs money. You know, even solar and wind costs money. So the emphasis has to be using less energy. And if you take the passive house profile, that's houses where, you know, they kind of heat themselves. You use solar again through windows. They don't lose any heat, and therefore, you know, they're incredibly cheap to run. So I think our focus has to be on interventions that mean people are not using energy in the first place at the rate at which they are with their terrible, leaky, poorly insulated homes.
Thank you. Councillor Miscandlin, you wanted to come back.
Thank you very much. I live in a rural area. My house is powered by oil, and so is every house round where I live. There is massive construction in Whittlesea, as you probably know at this moment in time. What is the building trade doing and being encouraged to do to build their houses to net zero? Because I don't see that happening. Planning permissions granted on houses, and Councillor Corney's a builder, so he knows this, that are net zero from the word go. They're not. And they will continue to be built like that because that's how the builders make their money. They'll tell you, oh, they're going to be increase the prices because we're making them net zero. So what's being done to encourage those builders to actually build carbon zero houses?
So your question is music to my ears, but it's really a question for government. So, as you know, we in local authorities are hamstrung by government's legislation on house building. Having said that, at South Cambridgeshire, we spend a lot of time negotiating and talking to developers to try and encourage them to willingly build houses to far higher energy efficiency standards than is required. And actually, we are about to embark on a dual venture to build over 200 houses between ourselves and a partner, and those will be zero carbon houses, but that's because we're providing the money for it, so therefore we can do it. So at South Cambridgeshire we're leading by example there. It's a massive frustration that the government set these ambitious targets but are not, as things stand at the moment, forcing house builders to build to zero carbon. And we're getting into the realms of politics now, I'm afraid. The role, I think your paper talks about the convening role of the combined authority. So I think, we need to be asking the mayor in his leadership role to be encouraging government, along with the other mayors, to actually move faster and start legislating to force the house builders to start building more energy efficient, including photovoltaics, less water use and so on and so forth. We all know this. We've known it for 20 years, and it's a real frustration that we're not doing it as yet.
Thank you. Councillor Corney.
I'm sure you wouldn't expect me to sit still and quiet after hearing these last couple of comments, really. I do think, from a builder's perspective, we have a set of guidelines that are put in front of us that we build to. I think it's from next year. There's no new gas connections to a new build. So from we made, as a company, we made our decision a year ago. We swapped over, to get used to doing it. But that's there. So it's going to be air source from now on. The only thing we'll say is the biggest frustration, and I've always tried to be different and sort of stand out. But frustration is, and I've said this before in our meetings about solar, is we can't put them on a house and then transfer them over when we sell the property. It is so complicated. Now that's if we could do that, it'd be something. We even to the point where if we sell a house off plan, we will say to the buyer, if you want to start that ball rolling, we can put the umbilical cord in for you once we know what system you're going with. But we can't do that because it's such a complex thing of transferring over, especially if they sign up for tariffs and things like that as well. So there is room to do something, but I think from a build perspective, it's phenomenally different now to what it used to be, and I think it's probably a little bit unfair to say. I can't speak on behalf of some of the big shed builders, maybe, but I know some of us a bit lower down we do have some principles, but I think it's I couldn't just sit still and not say anything on that. I hope that's okay.
May I come back? So I'm really pleased to hear that. I'd be really interested in knowing more about the barriers to installing PVs at build. Actually, I'd like to take that forward, and I think again there's a kind of lobbying role for the mayor in dealing with that. So absolutely, in South Cambridgeshire, we put a lot of effort into working with developers, and with quite a lot of success, and particularly the ones who are perhaps slightly smaller are they want to build the sort of stuff that they want to live in, and so we have some very good relationships and some very, very good examples. I mean, perhaps there's a role for the combined authority in highlighting and promoting best practice where that's happening, and thereby encouraging the big players to get on board as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davey.
Very brief. I just realised in the way this conversation is going, I should really declare that I'm on the member of the board of the Cambridge Investment Partnership, which of course is a relatively big player in terms of housing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Atkins, I had a couple of things I wanted, well, no, one thing in particular I wanted to say, so I didn't know whether you were kind of moving to sum up, but I will certainly move to you to sum up, and we need to discuss at least one of the recommendations I don't think we have discussed yet, probably two of them. My question was really about Councillor Atkins' paragraph 4.7 in his report, where he cogitates, I think is the word, on whether the combined authority would be better off abandoning its sort of try to do everything approach, as he seems to view it, and focus on achieving a few key things and leaving other matters to either central government and delegating them up, or leaving them to the constituent councils and partnerships. So what I wanted to ask Councillor Smith whether you'd be able to unpack your view on that a little bit, because it seems to me there's almost nothing, in fact I don't think there is anything at all about climate change in the devolution deal. So we're really treading ground that we haven't actually agreed in any sense at the establishment of the combined authority with central government. We also have a situation in which begging everybody's pardon, a lot of the expertise lies elsewhere, outside the combined authority. It certainly lies with the county council, where there is a well-established and absolutely flipping excellent team of officers working on climate change. They are fabulous to work with. There is expertise elsewhere in the district councils, and I'm just wondering what you see the role of the combined authority being, given its absence of that kind of initial mandate in the devolution deal, but also the fact that a lot of the expertise that it needs to work with is outside the organisation, and whether, given that, you have any thoughts on Councillor Atkins' suggestion about narrowing the focus of what the combined authority gets involved with in this area.
Thank you. So the action plan does actually show, where responsibility lies for different actions. So the brief of the Commission wasn't just to focus on what the combined authority was responsible for. It was to look at the Cambridgeshire-Peterborough area as a whole and what actions need to be taken in order to deliver on government targets. So there's already a lot there which we know is the responsibility of me at district level, other organisations and so on. So I think that's already done. So I think the work has already started on focusing, but I think it probably needs to be further refined. I think, as I've already said, I think we need to resource up. We're really lucky that we have two outstanding officers within the combined authority who have really stepped up to the mark in the last year on this, and I'm very, very grateful to them. But they probably, I don't think Adrian would deny, they could do with some help actually. So that's certainly my mission, to make sure that we resource up so that we become really, really effective. I think the risk of saying we're going to be so focused that we're just going to take our eye off the ball of some of these things is really dangerous, because if we're just parking stuff, saying, well, we can't do it, therefore we're not going to pay any attention to it, the risk is that nobody else is paying attention to it. So I think we, as a combined authority, we have an oversight and a scrutiny role as well, to make sure that those people who have been identified as responsible for doing certain things are doing them, and are doing them in accordance with what we think they should be doing. So I don't think we can just park stuff. It doesn't mean we're doing everything, but I think we really do have to be keeping an eye on things and holding partners and other bodies to account. Now, you mentioned, the outstanding officers you've got at the county, and similarly at South Cambs, and I'm sure in all the other authorities as well. I know work is already underway to develop strong functional relationships with officers in all the partner authorities, and I know the chief exec is very committed to that. We're all of us very happy to share. We are stronger together, dare I say it. But we have particular expertise in South Cambs. You have particular expertise in county. They do in Fenland have a lot of expertise in agriculture and so on. And it's about pulling that together. So this was the work that I talked about, identifying what everybody is doing, identify what everyone's resources are, and then pulling it together so that we're sharing best practice. We're possibly rolling out work across our borders, and then that will show us what the gap is. But I don't think that we can, anything in that action plan and with the work of the Commission, we can just say, actually, we just can't do this. Even if we can't do it, we can hold to account the people who should be doing it. Adrian might like to add something on this.
Adrian, would you like to contribute on that point?
I guess in terms of the approach we've taken, very much that collaborative approach across the area, and the action plan does try to bring over the fact that this action is needed at all levels, and we nest in with other action being taken both nationally and locally. So in terms of that coordination role, we've tried to address that in the plan by the plan focusing on the collaborative actions in particular going forward. So in terms of our approach to date, that's very much what we've been doing. I don't think I can really comment on what the strategic approach might be going forward in terms of officer resource and others. That's more of a political debate for the board.
Thanks very much indeed. I mean, I think everybody, all tiers of government are resourcing up for this. I just think it's very important that they resource up in consultation with each other, so that we're not all duplicating each other's efforts, but that we're all, contributing to a greater outcome for the whole. Councillor Davey, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Lorna. It's on the back of this, and I'm not quite sure if it was answered. So the question, I suspect, is probably for Adrian. Do you meet regularly with your colleagues from the county and the districts and Peterborough? Because that would seem to be the obvious. I'm not a fan of meetings for meeting's sake, but on this issue, one would have thought there'd be huge benefits in regular, if not quarterly, meetings for the officers. I think, I'm not quite clear whether Bridget or Adrian actually said that's what happens, or whether it's an aspiration for it to happen. But it would seem to make sense.
Let's ask Adrian. Adrian, how does it work?
Yes, so I'm pleased to say that we do meet regularly. In fact, we've been meeting more regularly in the run-up to developing the action plan. So after the board tasked us with coming back with an action plan for the March board, we've been meeting monthly. So there is a senior climate officer group that evolved out of the environment group that we had established under the auspice of leadership of the County Council, in fact, for the sort of post-COVID response. So Steve Cox from the County Council chairs that group, and that's been the officer lead on this. Sort of some of the climate practitioners in your authorities also meet regularly to exchange what's going on. So there is a lot of awareness of what we're all up to, and looking for those opportunities to coordinate and have synergy. So we have regular, and we're looking at those arrangements going forward to make sure they're fit for purpose now that we've got the action plan and we move more firmly into delivery.
Thank you, Adrian. And Steve Cox, of course, is now sharing his time between the County Council and the combined authority, so there's that crossover already happening. So thank you for that. Before I come to Councillor Atkins, I think this has been a really useful debate and a lot of ground covered today, so thank you all very much for that, and thank you, Adrian and Councillor Smith. I just wanted to turn back to the recommendations at the head of this report before I ask Councillor Atkins to sum up and move us forward. The first one is to note and comment, which I think we have done quite extensively, so thank you all for that. The second one is to consider whether to make any recommendations to officers and or to the board prior to the meeting of the board on Wednesday. And the third one is to agree what future scrutiny would be appropriate in this area. So I think we've covered the first one. I'm not sure we've covered those latter two. So I'm going to turn to Councillor Atkins and ask you whether you have any pointers on those last two recommendations or thoughts, and to help us come to a conclusion.
Thank you, Chair. I think in terms of recommendation B, in terms of the debate we've had today, I don't think there's anything come out of here that needs kind of urgently raising with board or officers before the meeting on Wednesday, but do correct me if I'm wrong. I think the general sense I get is that we're glad to see work coming forward in this area, and we're interested to see where these projects and these strategies go, albeit perhaps with some appropriate scepticism and or pessimism about the future work in this area. That's my kind of sense of where we've kind of got to on that. In terms of future scrutiny, I mean, this may be something that we need to come back to in the kind of new municipal year. Obviously, I'm happy to carry on as lead member for at least the next month and a half, and I think there was some discussion that this perhaps could come on to the forward plan of the committee, perhaps for say September, October time of this year might be an appropriate moment to come back to this, and perhaps also to invite some representation from the Independent Climate Commission to get their input at that stage as well. Those would be my suggestions there.
Thank you very much. We had also suggested, I think in June, having a conversation with the Energy Hub about the whole question of insulation and retrofit as well, which I think would be a useful conversation for the new committee to have. Do people feel comfortable with those suggestions from Councillor Atkins in response to recommendations B and C on our paper today? Yep.
Can I very quickly just sum up on the rest, if that's all right?
Yeah, please do.
And I had, there's two very quick questions that I just wanted to raise, which I think haven't kind of come up so far. The first was, Adrian, when we spoke a few weeks ago, you said work was ongoing to map this action plan onto the original kind of 58 recommendations that came out of the Commission's work. Is that still your intention to kind of align these two documents in that way, if I've understood correctly?
Yes, so yes, that we will be mapping them to see progress on both this action plan and the 58 recommendations, and we'll be taking that back to the Climate Working Group in due course, and having a conversation with the Independent Commission about their role in monitoring their recommendations.
Thank you. I think that'll be an interesting approach for this committee to monitor as well, and to kind of refer back to those original recommendations. The other issue I think that hasn't come up, which I think would be worth maybe just a few minutes of either Councillor Smith's or Adrian's time, would be if you could sketch out, as you did for me, some of the issues around the peatland within our region, and what impact that is having on the climate, and perhaps where some of the uncertainty around that lies, and what work is going on in that respect, because I think that's sufficiently important. I don't think we've touched on it yet, so I don't know which one of you wants to start on that. I think perhaps Adrian start. Yeah,
thank you, Adrian.
Yeah, happy to update on the situation. So the government recently changed its emissions reporting nationally to include emissions from agricultural use in terms of land use. What that meant for our region was the predicted emissions from cropland, and particularly given our large extent of peat and wasted peat that is farmed, is a very significant increase on the emissions recorded to Cambridge and Peterborough. We have been funding Fenland Soil as a group to undertake some additional monitoring, real field monitoring of emissions, to help the knowledge base around what actually is being emitted from our land. The national calculations are based on assumptions around the nature of our soils that were last updated in the late 80s, 90s, and therefore there is still a debate going on nationally around the extent of those emissions, and given how important they are to our area, we have funded a number of these additional monitoring stations as part of the climate work already, and essentially that is to enable us to have a better understanding and to influence the government's current work through its lowland peat task force in particular, which is looking at national aspirations of restoring areas of peat across the country because of the emissions impact.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, that's useful.
Thank you, Adrian. So just fine for me. I'd like to express again my thanks to the officers for their support in writing this report. Thank you to everyone as well for their contributions today. I thought that was a very interesting debate. I think what really struck me in preparing this work is that the region really is on the front line in terms of the UK when it comes to climate change. You know, looking at the impacts of a global temperature rise of 3 degrees in our region, you know, which I highlight in 2.2, we're talking about rainfall could be 50% reduced. We could see regular summer temperatures of 40 degrees and a sea level rise of 1 metre or more. And in the context of the areas that we represent, it's hard to describe that as anything other than lethal, frankly. And to be honest, I would say that if we, as a globe, if we manage a temperature rise of only 3 degrees in this century, we will have done pretty well, I would have thought. You know, that is not that is still, you know, that's obviously more than, you know, governments are committing to, but that is well within the realms of what's possible. So this really is a challenge for our region, and also in terms of our current emissions, even excluding the issues of peatland we were just discussing, that emissions here are 25% higher per person than the UK average. We are both contributors and sufferers of this problem beyond where the rest of the country is, and therefore I think there is a real challenge for us to be a leader nationally here, and to both do what we can in the region and in our councils, and to show the rest of the nation what can be done. And I think if there's one thing to take away from that and all of our commendable scrutiny on this work, I think that needs to be taken into account. So thanks for everyone's time and input on this today, and I'll move back to Lorna to move the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Atkins. So we have the recommendations in front of us. I think we have covered all of those. So I don't think I've seen any dissent from what we have agreed regarding those recommendations. Are people comfortable that we have done what we need to do today on that score? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you very much, Councillor Smith, for joining us this morning. Much appreciated. Right, our next item is item 7, which is the accommodation strategy update, and there will be an oral update by Nick Sweeney, who should be joining us online. This is following an email that was sent out to members a few days ago. So, Nick, welcome. If you'd like to take it away and tell us about the accommodation strategy update, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to update committee on the current situation in respect of identifying and securing office accommodation for the combined authority. Members will recall a meeting of the 24th of January where I explained how an accommodation strategy resulted in an initial search of the public sector portfolio. 6 potential office facilities were then assessed in detail, and Pathfinder House and Sandmartin House were shortlisted as preferred options. Terms have since been explored and negotiated with officers from Peterborough City Council and Huntingdonshire District Council, and these were presented to leaders on the 9th of March. On Wednesday, this Wednesday coming, a recommendation is to be made that Board identifies Pathfinder House in Huntingdon as the preferred option, and authority will be requested to secure a lease, and to incur expenditure to make the accommodation suitable for operational use. Both Pathfinder House and San Martin House are modern, open-plan facilities that provide many positive benefits, but on balance, Pathfinder House was considered to be the most competitive option for the following reasons. Based on proportionate floor area, the overall costs were less. The central location of Pathfinder House within the Combined Authority region is considered more convenient for most regular users of the accommodation. And Pathfinder House offers the ability to sublet, and this could provide future cost benefits. Both options are affordable within existing revenue budgets and demonstrate significant savings when compared to the costs of the former office at Alconbury. There is sufficient capital budget available to meet the costs of the move and to provide a comfortable and practical layout. Another valuable benefit is the ability to share use of public meeting facilities, which saves us having to provide expensive duplicate facilities that aren't in constant use. This includes using the Civic Suite at Pathfinder House. So to summarise, on Wednesday, we'll be asking for board to identify Pathfinder House, Huntingdon, as the preferred option, to authorise the acquisition of a leasehold property interest, to authorise a tenancy at will to facilitate operational occupation until formal lease documentation can be finalised, and to delegate authority to the Chief Executive to approve a preferred layout and design and to incur associated expenditure. So this concludes my update to committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. Does anybody have any comments they want to make on that? Or any questions? Councillor van der Weyer.
Yes, so obviously the reasons that are set out for this choice, I mean, in as far as obviously not a very high level of detail, but I'm sure they seem quite sensible. I was struck by the fact that there's going to be a separate office maintained in Ely, and the justifications for that were not. There wasn't a sort of particularly strong case made there. I'm sure there is a strong case. I was wondering whether that is going to be provided at some point, because it would seem them. Just without knowing any of the details, operational and organisational disbenefits to having two separate offices so far apart.
Nick, any comments on that?
Yes, it's a valid observation. I think it's important really for members when considering this to bear in mind that the office at Ely was a satellite office when we had the former office at Alconbury. And then when the office at Alconbury closed, there was still a requirement for the organisation to have a registered office. And the satellite office at Ely served that purpose and continues to serve that purpose and shall do until a main corporate head office, if you like, has been secured. The situation with Ely is that it's not yet certain. We have a contractual agreement that lasts until the end of the year, and so I think what we'll have to do is secure a main office accommodation and then consider the future of the Ely office accommodation. But as I've tried to explain, because we have to have and continue to have an operational office functioning, we have treated it as a separate issue to this exercise which I'm undertaking, which is primarily a property acquisition. So I hope that provides some explanation in respect of Ely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Councillor Corney.
Not really a question, but also hindsight, probably should have declared an interest. Obviously, being here representing HDC, probably should have. It's a bit tenuous, but probably ought to play it safe.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other hands, so we'll come to a conclusion on that item. Thank you very much indeed for the update, Nick. Much appreciated. Right. Okay. So Item 8 is the one cam closure update, so that's a verbal update from Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair. It's very brief, really. I met with the two Roberts, Parkin and Fox, John Alsop and Anne last month, just to have a look at one cam and where we're at. We discussed the process of closure of the company. We looked at finances, both pre and post May last year, which is clearly the key point of decision making when the Mayor decided that one cam wouldn't go ahead, and also what happens next. In terms of the basic facts, just to give over today, the board met finally in December and agreed to prepare audited accounts, management accounts, etc., etc. But there are some still outstanding matters that required sign-off, which we went through. And I think as a result of that, it seemed to make sense, rather than go through a part response today, to come back after May, when the board and the one cam was finally closed in total, and then we'll have the full financial implications, and also, perhaps equally important, what might be happening next. So my proposal to the Scrutiny Committee today is that we'll bring this back after May, subject of course to the relevant people being in place. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Members content with that? Yep. Okay, thank you. Item 9 then is the forward plan of the combined authority, and I'm going to turn to our lead members in turn to ask whether there is anything that they feel the need to update us on that. So starting with Councillor Bagent on transport.
Chair, we continue to monitor the amount of discussion that's going on. Lots of things proposed and talked about, not a great deal of boots on the ground. I did pick up the point on e-scooter and e-bikes that was raised at the last meeting, and asked for the Mayor to set up a seminar on this, and we're doing that. I'm going to be chairing it, and it will be coming up as soon after the election as possible. They talked about the day after, and I thought perhaps we might need a couple more days than that. But the idea being to look at this opportunity and make sure it develops in a way that will be useful rather than difficult, shall we say. But really waiting for things to be done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Councillors Coles and Miss Candlin on skills, anything to alert us to?
Thank you, Chair. No, we've just seen the latest uplift in terms of funding and very small changes in terms of one provider, so I don't think there's anything particularly to be concerned about.
I spoke to the new CPCA officer last week, and going to try and arrange a meeting between Councillor Coles, myself and that officer, so that we can get a way forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor van der Weyer, Housing.
Yes, so I met the Director of Housing, must have been 3 weeks ago now. The main topics I raised with him were things that have come up here. There's the loans programme and how that's going, because there was sort of some indications of potential risks previously. The loans are, as it says in the forward plan, are a standing item on the Housing Committee. So there is a lot of monitoring of that by the Housing Committee, and the officers are in constant contact with the developers, the recipients of the loans. So I think there are measures in place to see any risks as early as possible. The other thing is coming up on in June to the board. There's this question of the future combined authority housing purpose and function beyond March 2022, so the officers are undertaking an engagement process at the moment with stakeholders and constituent authorities to discuss on quite an open basis what that could look like, and then it will be discussed at the board in public on the 1st of June. So given that process is happening and is underway, I think there's probably nothing, no immediate role for us. I think it would be very useful to effort as a committee to engage with the question shortly after June next year. So I mean, when we come to our work programme, I'll certainly be suggesting inviting the Director of Housing and the Chair of the committee as soon as possible after June.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Atkins, I'm finding it hard to imagine anything that could be said about climate has not already been said this morning. But
yeah, quite so. So this Wednesday is obviously, as we've already discussed, and as Councillor Smith reminded me, also the Sustainable Growth Statement coming this Wednesday as well. Nothing further to report.
Thank you very much. Now, Councillor Dew monitors the Business Board, but unfortunately is not with us today, so I think that's that item then covered. The next item is the Combined Authority Board agenda for the meeting on Wednesday, and whether there is anything of particular burning concern that people feel we need to do something about, either on Wednesday or subsequently, or indeed before, if there's anything that we want to pick up informally first. So does anybody have anything on the board agenda that they would want us to raise? The only thing that struck me was the matter that we've already discussed at some length about the return of the 22 million grant for energy retrofit, home insulation retrofit. But other than that, I've not. Anyone else? Councillor Davey.
It was just picking up Andy and Alex's comments earlier on today relating to the skills committee, whether there's anything we should be looking at there.
I think that informally what I was hearing was a thought that we might want to ask the incoming committee to look at the skills work of the board in a little more depth after May, and I think we can therefore potentially add that as a suggestion for the work programme in a more over the whole of the municipal year kind of way, rather than a one-off piece of work. Does that sound sensible? Yep.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So having done the agenda then, our own work programme is the next item, and we are being asked to receive recommendations from our lead members on items for the work programme. We've heard some already. We've had a conversation about the energy hub for June. Councillor Atkins has suggested coming back to the climate work in September or October. We've heard from Councillor van der Weyer about housing, and also just now the suggestion that we might look to ask the new committee to consider how our the skills agenda in more detail. So then there's the second recommendation is to comment on the status of the current work programme, which is pretty empty, and rightly so, I think, at this stage, because we don't want to tie the hands of the new committee. But we have those suggestions that I've already mentioned. And then the third item is to approve the scoping document for community learning. And I'm going to turn to Councillors Coles and Miscandlin in a moment to tell us anything they wish to tell us about that. So are there any additional work programme recommendations that you wish to make to the incoming committee? Not at the moment, no, fine. So we've received your recommendations. Commenting on the status of the current work programme, I think it's fairly empty at the moment, as I say. So Councillors Coles and Miscandlin, scoping document for community learning.
Thank you, Chair. The document I bring before you really is the first of a deep dive into one area of skills that we'd like to look at, and this one is clearly not directly involved with skills, but in terms of community learning. It's one of the areas that has had probably most impact over the years in terms of moving funding away from community learning into the skills agenda. So what I'm proposing here is a fairly in-depth look at what's currently provided, how it meets the needs, whether everything's been identified, what the impact has been of the changes in funding from the days of the EU funding a lot of community learning. And I've consulted with the officers, I've consulted with the provider, and I'm hopeful that we can take a little bit of time on this to make sure we get it right, because I don't think this is going to be something that we can turn around particularly quickly, but it does at least give a significant and in-depth focus on a particular area. And then, of course, if it works, we can then move further on to other areas if we think that it's providing benefit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Miss Candlin, was there? Excellent. Okay, thank you. Members, any comments on that scoping document? No? We're happy to approve that. Councillor Atkins.
Forgive me, Councillor. Could you define, I mean, this may be part of your work, but could you define community learning as you understand it in this context?
Very good question, and you'll see one of the points I say is what is an accepted definition of community learning. There are several views, and I just want to make sure that we understand, the sector understands, and the Combined Authority all understands that it's the same thing.
Thank you very much. Good question indeed. Councillor Miss Candlin.
Can I point out that this is one of the subjects that will be discussed with the CPCA officers when we get the meeting with them, and that's to be arranged, but it's to make a clearly defined avenue that we go down to get the right results.
Sounds good. Okay, any other comments? We're happy to approve then, are we, that scoping document? Thank you very much indeed to you both for working on that. So I think we've done the work programme then as an item, which then means that our final item is the date of the next meeting. We have a reserved date of something in April, and I'm suggesting that we do not use that. There is no meeting of the board in April, and I'm suggesting that we don't use that reserve date. There's nothing in our work programme, but 22nd of April. Councillor Davey.
If we're not meeting in April, can we just place on record formally our thanks to you for chairing us and guiding us through the work of the Scrutiny Committee over the last year? Thank you, Councillor Dupree.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm always painfully reminded that it was on the basis of a tossed coin. We have no April meeting then, I think. The next formal meeting of the new committee, which may or may not contain any or all of us, will be on the 13th of June. In the meantime, I'm suggesting that once the composition of the new committee is known after the elections, and that will take a little while, I think, to read the runes and calculate the spreadsheets and so on, that we have an informal online handover meeting between the existing committee and the incoming committee to hand over the areas of work we've discussed this morning, and bless them with the benefit of our accrued and collected wisdom. So look out for a date for that, because you will be invited to that even if you are no longer a member of this committee. I'd like to put on record my thanks to the officers who have served us so ably and graciously throughout the last year. It's been a pleasure to work with you, so thank you all very much, and also to you all as members. I think it's been a very good committee. We've moved on considerably, with thanks, I think, to the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny Review, which has very much reoriented us, and I think we've had a much more constructive year, and I get a feeling that members have felt that you're becoming more aware of a purpose for the committee and for yourselves in that, and I think that's been good to see. I think this committee has performed well and done some good work this year, so thank you all very much indeed, one and all, for your contribution to that. Thank you very much.